everyone. So with that in mind, let's look at the stat of the month. How do effective executives spend their time? This was based on the McKinsey quarterly article that came out in December. Some of you may have seen a pretty interesting article. You can certainly go check it out yourself as well. But in the light of the two of the first questions we'll be addressing today, we thought this was an important stat to share. That just half of executives say they spend their time at work, that the time that they spend at work aligns with their organization's strategic priorities. And those that do certainly, of course, feel that they're more effective. And part of the reason for those that do have the ability or do feel like their work aligns with the organization's strategic priorities is based on the support that they have within the organization to deal with, of course, I wouldn't say administrative duties, but other duties within the organization. So I think that's a pretty important point to make. There's several other important points within that article. Nancy, any others that popped out to you that you thought were important and worth sharing about how effective executives spend their time?
Yeah, I thought that the one point that they made here, that people who actually did do strategic planning were more effective. They were more the optimizers in setting the direction for the organization, and they were mitigating a lot of the unexpected issues and risks. Whereas those people that didn't plan, they were actually focusing more on they were being more reactive, not proactive. There was a big difference there. The other thing, too, that I thought was kind of interesting in the article, that many of the executives were actually spending quite a bit more time, more than they wanted to, on messaging, email, social media. And I thought that was an interesting statistics, too. They wanted to spend only 20% of their time, and they actually were spending 29% of their time. So those are a couple things.
Perfect. So it's always interesting to know what other people are doing. So there are some interesting stats that you can take with you, and certainly if you need to pull them, you can go grab that article. So Ryan, let's move into that's right, and I as a backup point to that, and this also tees us up for the first question that we have, is the Bain Management Tools and Trends study. We love this, of course, this study, because it just kind of helps weed through all of the management concepts that are out there that can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, and just frothy is one of the words that I like to use. So this is the results from the 2010 study, it looks like, based on the figure that's on the screen, but they also, they do this every year, and they must be having data that's coming out here shortly. But at any rate, strategic planning tends to be one of the most highly used, which is the y-axis, highly used management tools with the highest satisfaction, which is the x-axis. So the axis going up and down is the usage axis, and the satisfaction axis is the horizontal axis. So they've done this for about the past 10 years. You've probably heard us point out the statistics in the past. It feels a little bit self-serving, but it does actually reaffirm what other folks are thinking about as it relates to strategic planning as a satisfying or an effective management tool compared to kind of a lot of the other management tools, and you can see them there. The survey pulls out some components of strategic planning, like you can see mission and vision statements and balanced scorecard and some other items that are listed on there as well. But again, when we're thinking about what are other folks doing and what are other organizations using to drive and be more effective managers and leaders, strategic planning tends to be one of the top, and again has been for almost the entire time of the study. So great chart, really great set of data. So with that does tee us up for the first couple of questions. Ryan, you want to take us through?
Yes, we have two similar questions that came in. You can read them here. The first one is a little bit longer, but I think it really lays the framework and the thinking. So I will read the second question here in interest of time. We have a couple of people on our executive team who believe strategic planning is a waste of their time. What can I do to convince them otherwise?
And you can see the first question that's up there, again, as Ryan mentioned, is fairly similar to the second one, which is where the CEO is the individual who feels like that strategic planning is a waste of their time. So, this continues to be a question that comes to this forum, which is how do we convince leaders about the value and the benefits of strategic planning? So you saw in our statistics that a lot of the organizations, and the organizations that certainly responded to the Bain study, which are highly successful organizations, and it's a global study, actually hugely value strategic planning. So that doesn't necessarily mean, however, and certainly hasn't come to this forum, that your executives or yourself, if you're one of them, value strategic planning. And I think the reason for that, of course, is all of us have been part of wasted efforts, offsites that were really, really good that didn't generate results, strategic plans that are fabulous and beautiful but aren't actually used. And that seems to be, of course, the norm as opposed to the exception. So when you're faced with that and you're trying and you're believing that strategic planning is going to make a difference for your organization, you're likely to run into, it seems like a lot of us are running into the challenge of what there's some resistors within the group, and certainly when the CEO is the resistor, that tends to be really problematic. So bringing to this forum, we're going to take a couple extra minutes on this particular topic. What can you specifically do? Well, I'm going to share a couple ideas. I'm going to pass it over to Nancy, but let's start with maybe the obvious point, which is I think it's important, and I'm going to assume that you're not on the executive team, and you're being tagged with driving the strategic planning initiative because somebody along the way decided that you needed to do this. So we tend to think we need to do strategic planning without doing a good discovery, and we don't often do, discovery when we're in the organization. So if you sort of take yourself outside and look at yourself maybe as an external resource for just a minute, maybe looking in, taking the balcony view and looking in, I think it'd be really helpful to ascertain truly, number one, is what are the outcomes that the organization is seeking by saying we need a strategic plan. And that's a pretty obvious point. So what are the outcomes? Why are we doing this? And not just because we're supposed to, because it's what you're supposed to do in business, but really why. And I think that would be an important point to start with the entire executive team, including the CEO. So that's one thing. The other thing that's kind of part of that is and I know this doesn't always feel right, but what's the burning platform? What is the reason that someone in the executive team, maybe it's the board, that is asking for a strategic plan? What's the burning platform? Is it because the growth is off the charts and you're having a really hard time organizing the team around the right direction? Is it because you're in a retrenchment mode and the economy is really causing you the problems that it is for a lot of organizations, and you need to really figure out what the right things are to focus on? What is it? So that's a second thing to think about. And I think a third thing to maybe think about, and then gets this kind of upfront stuff, is taking an idea from the change management book called Switch, is really making the case. So what difference is having a strategic plan really going to make for the organization, starting with the end in mind? So we're 12 months from now. This is the question I always ask. It's 12 months from now. What difference are we going to see in the organization based on having an active strategic, and let's call it a strategic management process. Let's just not call it a strategic plan. We call it a strategic plan that assumes that we have an end point. And the benefits from strategic planning do not come from having an end point. They come from having an active process. So 12 months from now, what's different in the organization? What do we want to see based on going through the development of a strategic plan and then the use of the thing? So those are a couple of upfront things to suss out and clearly identify and get consensus on as you're embarking on or trying to reduce the resistance in the commitment around strategic planning. So let's call it strategic management. So those are a couple things. I have some more things to share, but I know Nancy from her experience has some items that she wanted to share as well. So Nancy?
Yeah, I'm thinking more about the first question about the CEO who is really resisting it, and I can feel that person, the person who asked the question, your frustration. And I see that the CEO is maybe very tactically driven, which is fine, and his projects are very, very important to the company, which, as most directors, they are. And he's focusing more on getting the projects done, and he's been very successful in doing that versus thinking more strategically and high level. So I think that maybe one suggestion that I would have is that for you possibly to get together with another person who actually has the ear of the CEO, and you can build a high-level plan, and then take the CEO's projects and actually align the projects underneath the high-level plan that you developed, and then show it to the CEO and maybe possibly prioritize the different projects, and then start actually implementing the high priority projects. And then show the CEO and work with them and show him how the strategic plan has exactly what he wants with the projects in mind, and then wrap around later on, months later, and actually start adding some more strategic things and show him how that the benefits of aligning the projects with the high-level plan can be beneficial, and show him how the results actually can be measured and the progress of the different projects. The other thing, too, is then you can wrap around and actually start building the plan out more. So you're taking it one step at a time, baby steps, and then actually getting the buy-in from the CEO. But getting the buy-in from the CEO is important. It's just figuring out how to actually do it. But once you prioritize those projects and evaluate the projects, then he can see how those projects are actually part of the strategic plan and the benefits of the strategic plan.
You know, I just following up on that, Nancy, a couple points to that. One of our rules in our practice actually is that we will not engage in an organization if we don't have the sponsorship of the CEO or the organizational leader. So it's a pretty strong stance to take, and I think as we're looking at our first question related to the CEO's engagement around the strategic planning process, maybe the question you might consider just not doing it. And of course, we believe in the benefits of strategic planning. We believe that strategic planning, if I can say it this morning, can make a difference in organizations. But it can't make a difference in organizations if the leadership isn't there. And sometimes the organizational readiness is just not there. So that's kind of a different idea and a different approach to take. So a couple other points, and again, we're taking a little more time with this, but it's a big topic. We mentioned that strategic planning and strategic management is a management tool. So one of the thoughts that I had is make sure to put it in its place. So what is it doing for us as an organization, for an organization as a management tool, really? So it's creating shared priorities. It's helping us align our resources to those priorities. Again, this sounds all sort of high level, but it's very true. And the concept of creating shared priorities with a group of individuals is not that simple. And the right priorities, given the environmental factors that are occurring, is that dose of reality about what we really can do as an organization. So, creating those shared priorities that are based in reality, and then aligning our resources, time and money, to accomplish those priorities. And that is this idea of coordinated action. How do we create coordinated action throughout an organization? So I had mentioned before this idea of making the case. This is something that we just did last week in an organization, and I thought this was a really powerful question and exercise. So the question sounds like this, is how many decisions do you think are made in your organization every day? And there's a pretty, I don't know whether it's a vetted statistic or not, but apparently we make about 3,000 decisions every hour. Now, those decisions include everything from should I have a drink of water or, to should I send an email, and they're not all business decisions, of course, but let's just go with it for a minute. So, fine. So 3,000 decisions every hour times the number of people in your organization times the number of hours in a day gets you to a lot of decisions in the organization. Maybe you take it to 1,000 business decisions, I don't know. But at any rate, it's a lot of decisions every day. And ultimately, when we're talking about making the case, we're saying, do we have a need to help those decisions more accurately go in the right direction, to guide those decisions in a more appropriate way throughout the thousands of employees, the hundreds of employees in your organization? If the answer to the question is yes, then we would say that strategic planning would have a benefit as an initiative in your organization. If the answer to that question is no, we're doing just fine now, then again, maybe it's not the right time. So just a thought on that. The other thing I thought about too when you're trying to make a case to executives is think about doing a staff survey and ask the organization, is there a need for more clarity around the strategic direction of the organization? Is there a need for more clarity around the short-term priorities? Do they feel like their work needs to be more informed based on where the organization is going? And you may find the staff feels super aligned and super having visibility into the strategic direction, and other people may decide, you may get survey data back that says, no, we're feeling great. So that's another way to go about it. Ask the quote-unquote customers. Ask the folks that the executive team is leading. So those are some very specific points that I thought would be helpful in these two instances. Nancy, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was great.
Okay.
I think you covered it.
Great. Again, it's sort of long-winded, but hopefully a couple of those pieces are things that you can take with you. Ryan, was there anything that anybody on the line added to our discussion related to leadership and strategic planning?
No, not on this question, so we'll just go ahead and jump into the next question here, and that is, following the MyStrategicPlan methodology, can you better explain the difference between organization-wide strategies and strategic objectives? Ultimately, why is this the organization-wide strategy needed?
So I'll answer that question. That's a great question. The overarching strategy for the organization really is the organization-wide strategy is the overarching strategy for the organization. It may be for many years or it could be year by year, but you have to kind of look at the overarching as the umbrella, or as maybe the mantra for the year would be the organization-wide strategy. And it could be the typical ones such as customer intimacy, product leadership, or low-cost leadership, or those are the typical overarching strategies for organizations, and then actually develop your strategic plan based upon which of those you are. The other thing, too, is the organization-wide strategy could be year by year. You know, what is the focus of the year, so everybody throughout the whole organization knows actually what is your focus for the year. So it could be maybe building a foundation for your organization if you're new, or it could be actually establishing processes and really defining our processes so you can capitalize on that, or it could be growth through the U.S., growth through the internationally, or something that you're really focusing on so everybody knows that is the mantra for the year. Now the strategic objectives, actually those I look at as mini strategies within each of the four balanced scorecard perspectives. So it would be a mini strategy for customers, for your financial, for your operations, and your people. But basically, those strategic objectives are actually linking your mission from where you are right now to your vision of where you want to go. And then actually, you have the strategies for each of the perspectives and that's supporting your organization-wide strategy or your umbrella strategy or your mantra for the year. Do you have something to add, Erica, too?
Yeah, adding to that, and we've just been talking a lot about this lately as well, is organization-wide strategies tend to be the most confusing for folks, and so that in that instance, you might consider just keeping them drafts until you can really get some clarity around them. But as Nancy mentioned, the intention behind org-wide strategies are to be one of those three Porter-based, Michael Porter, the king of strategy, value-creating strategy. So what is our value, our primary base for delivering value and competing in the marketplace? So customer intimacy, product leadership, or low-cost leadership, or best price, sometimes people say as well. So we can get into all the details on that. Of course, it gets a little bit probably too maybe, and sometimes feels a little bit too academic for this particular juncture. On the My Strategic Plan site, there's a whole bunch of examples related to those three things that I just mentioned. But let's kind of give ourselves a little bit more of a mental picture on this. I like to think about org-wide strategies as guardrails. And they're the guardrails that tell you what's in and what's out. So the guardrails between where we are today and our future state. that vision. So one of the great org-wide strategies, and I think this is something that is actually in Jim Collins' new book, Great by Choice. He's named org-wide strategies a SMAC recipe, which I think is a great, he does all sorts of great branding around business terms. At any rate, one of the items for Southwest, that's one of their org-wide strategies, was fly only 737s. Low cost, their primary base for competing is low-cost leadership, and they have some very specific statements around what that means for them. And that's in Jim Collins' book. So it's just a great example of sinking your teeth into what org-wide strategies really are. And my recommendation would be to not gloss over this, but rather it can be a very, very helpful set of guidelines, a set of umbrella statements about helping you figure out what's in and what's out. So guardrails is your vision, is your mental picture, for org-wide strategies. Strategic objectives, on the other hand, are kind of those mileposts, those are long-term. We like to think long-term. They provide that structure for your plan. It's what you cascade goals off of. Of course, those are the terms that we use. Use your own terms. And they are those things that are those mid-term statements, as Nancy mentioned, between your vision and where you are today. And we like to see them balanced out because that creates the balanced part of your balanced scorecard. So good question. Hopefully that gives you the mental picture between what those two items are. Certainly love to see them connected because they are very connected to make sure that your whole plan is holistic. So, Ryan, how about our next question?
Hey, before we hop into that, we don't have any feedback yet, but we are welcoming any live questions. I think we have 2 more pre-submitted questions. So if you have any live questions or you'd like to have any feedback on a question that's been answered or one that's coming up, go ahead and type it in the box, and we can also open the phone for you to respond live. So that next question, I understand what key performance indicators are, but I'm having trouble identifying what goals should be categorized as KPI. What should I consider in determining my KPIs? I go back and forth from having 1 to having 20, and I just don't feel like it is working for me.
That's a great point, Nancy. I'll take this, and then you can follow up.
Okay.
One of the let's back up from this for just a moment. So one of the philosophical approaches that we have in planning is that if there's a metric that you use as a guide for your business, more than likely you're trying to influence that metric. Let's just take something simple like sales, revenue. And so in order for us to move that, we of course need to articulate what actions we're going to take in order to, very simply increase revenue. So our philosophical approach is that metrics are, of course, associated with goals. So this particular question is in relationship to the use of MyStrategicPlan, but it flows across anything for that matter. So all goals, of course, if it's a good goal, it states the outcome. It has a good metric and ideally associated with it. So, and I just went backwards from that, but goals should be measurable, of course, and most of the time those measurements and those goals that we're stating have a quantifiable outcome that we're seeking. And of those goals that are high priority items like revenue growth, for example, most of the time we want to see those tracked in a quantifiable way, and most of the time we want to identify those as key performance indicators. And when we call them key performance indicators, the thought process around that would be to say, are these the key metrics that we need to be paying attention to in the tracking of our strategy? So how are we doing against our strategy? And those key performance indicators should tell us how we're doing. And those key performance indicators are associated with goals because we, of course, create actions based on goals. So that's how kind of all of that comes together. We get caught a little bit, and I know what the instructions say on our website, but we get caught a little bit on how many we should have. We need to have a balanced set of metrics to track the performance of our organization. So if it takes 20, it takes 20. If it takes 5, it takes 5. They just need to be the right ones that you can look at and go, yeah, we're on or we're off track, or where are the things that I need to hone in on as a leader to make sure that our strategy is moving forward. So, Nancy, you want to add to that?
Another thing, too, you can look at KPIs and assess them and gauge the health of your organization with that, and you can really determine if you're on track or if you're off track. But basically, the number of metrics, as Erica mentioned, are the key to driving your organization forward. So the number, you just need to determine how many you need and what are the good ones to drive your organization forward, engage the health of your organization.
Great. So pretty simple in that regard. The harder part, of course, is the tracking component, but that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead. We'll do the last pre-submitted question we have, and then we have a couple live questions that have been typed in. So this next question, in making sure strategic planning remains alive and relevant and our efforts don't fall flat, what kind of resources should I budget for in terms of finances, human resources, etc.? Any other tips we should consider?
I think one of the really important resources is time, and I think you really need to schedule time to meet regularly, whether it be monthly or quarterly, but always really take the time to keep that plan in front of your people and really make a commitment to them to let them know that you think that planning really is something that you're really focused on, and that they regularly need to update their goals on a monthly or a quarterly basis, and that you will have monthly or quarterly meetings together as a staff to review the goals and how everybody's doing. The other thing, too, is and to report out on the goals. But it's really important to devote time. And then, of course, align the financial resources. If there's a goal that needs financial resources, it's important to support that with money and also personnel. But really, I think to implement a plan and keep it alive really does, after it's developed, it really does, at first it will take a lot of work, but it really does take a fairly minimal work once it's built into the culture and everybody really is focused on strategy. But to have and also another point too, to have a fully executable plan, it's really important that each of the goals is assigned to someone, that there is a responsible party for each one of those. Do you want to add to that, Erica?
Yeah, one thing that we've been talking a lot about lately around here is the fact that strategic planning is the means to an end. And so what's the end? The end is building an environment, building a culture, building a culture of what? Building maybe a culture of strategic thinking, maybe building a culture of performance management. There's probably all kinds of other words that we could add to that, and it's something that we've been thinking a lot about, as I mentioned earlier, and you can see we're still mulling around with it just a little bit. But when we come across the questions around how do we keep our strategic plan alive, the lens to look at this through is keeping it alive means that we are taking action and behaving as an organization in a way that is in harmony and unison with what we say is important. So if we say these 5 strategic priorities are important, then we are making choices. It's all about making choices, We're making choices about how we spend our time and how we spend our money accordingly. And in the minute we don't do that, then the strat plan is useless, because we are no longer being true to what we said was important as an organization, and leaders are responsible for setting that tone. As Nancy mentioned, we have to get together and talk about how we're doing. That's just the way it is. A great quote is, the heartbeat of any strategic management process is your quarterly or monthly business reviews or strategy reviews. If you don't have them, you don't have a process. That doesn't mean that you need everybody to be at the table, but the report up of how we're doing is the critical component to check in. And as Nancy said, it doesn't need to take a lot of time. That's why we built our system to say, take 15 minutes, tell us how you're doing against your goals. And the point of that is to keep those in front of everybody, ourselves included, as well as to visibly have an accountability on a monthly or quarterly basis against our progress. And be able to come to the table and say something's not working. What are we going to do? Do we shift the priorities? Do we change our projects, etc.? So I think when we think about keeping strategic planning alive, the summary point on that is to say we're talking about trying to make a shift in how we behave as an organization, how we function as a group of people, and that's a cultural thing, and that requires goals that people know, that people have accountability for, status against those goals, and adaptation of those goals accordingly. So, and all of that means getting together and talking about them and remaining true to what we said our priorities are. So, some live questions, Ryan?
We do have 2 live questions, but first we had one person add in some comments on this. He said, in response to this question, you have also said in past huddles that strat planning is about accountability, but also done correctly holds people able. If it helps your people, they're able, and thus they benefit from it. So I think what they're saying is there's a stickiness to it. If you're making people able, it helps in the long run.
Yeah, I love that whole concept of instead of accountability, holding people able. That's from Susan Scott. Great concept. Just a little bit of a twist.
Let's see, I think that was the last pre-submitted question, so we'll hop on. Sorry, just jumping ahead here. We'll go ahead and paste the question in here. It's not pasting here. I'll do it in a minute. I'll read the question. You can get started. It's how to help C-level executives determine, prioritize what goals, milestones to include in a plan.
Okay, that's a good question. So I think that, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, we're marrying up the idea of well, maybe I didn't quite state this as clearly, but the idea of coming to the table with a collective consensus, as well as coming to the table with a view of really what's going on in the organization. And so I'm not really sure from this question how much time you have or how much time the executive team is willing to work with you on prioritization of goals. But let's go from the easy side to the sort of more time-intensive side of the process flow, if you will. So the simple side, of course, is through your offsite, or maybe it's after your offsite, to go through some sort of rating and ranking of the goals that you came up with. And oftentimes we need to do that because there's just too many. Most of the time we come out of offsites with way more than we can do, and I think one important thing to do is to identify what those critical projects are. Projects is the wrong word. Critical initiatives, critical goals are that need to be accomplished in the short term, let's say the next 12 months. So one way to go about that is to get the collective consensus, i.e. via voting, and I particularly hate sticky dots, but they do tend to work when we really need to get a short list of priorities. So you could certainly do it that way. You could do it via email. You could also have the CEO identify those critical priorities. Sometimes based on the leadership style, that is his or her prerogative, certainly, to clarify that. So what I'm saying and not saying exactly clearly is the fact that one way to go about it is to say, okay, well, we have a whole host of goals that we think are important. Let's just assume that we're going to agree that because we came up with all of these, they are truly important, but we need to make sure that we're focusing on the critical few for the short term. So let's keep them all, and let's find 5 to 7, 3 to 5 that are the must-dos for the 2012 planning period. And the way that you get to your must-dos is either through a collective collaborative process, i.e. all the executive team voting, or an authority process where the CEO selects. So that's one approach. On the totally other end of the spectrum, which is way more time intensive, is to do kind of more of a, let's just call it an opportunity analysis that marries up the external information and the internal opinions through a rating and ranking process. And there's all kinds of different opportunity analysis type approaches out there, but it tends to be more quantitative based, where you're assigning values and costs to the different goals and then coming up with a rating and ranking such that you could actually see which ones have the potential to have the highest impact. And that's much more probably a mindful approach to coming up with the right few. It's less about the group, and it's more about bringing in external information. So it's important for you to decide which is where the outcome is. Is it important to really go through that analysis and marry up external data with the internal skills and capabilities? Is it more important to drive consensus with the executive team and go about it that way? So those are two ways to get to a shorter list, if you will, of which goals and milestones are the most important for your planning period.
I don't have anything to add to that.
We do have some, specifically in the virtual strategy guide, we do have an opportunity analysis template that is up there. It is based on external opportunities, which is where people tend to have the most challenge. Should we launch should we launch a new product? Should we open a new division in XYZ market? Should we partner? All of those things. And so that tends to be where there's a lot of, most of the time there's too many. We need to make choices there. But you could certainly use it to evaluate all of your goals. That's a suggestion. Brian, any other questions from the team?
We have one other one that we won't type in here, but it's a good question, one that we've been thinking about internally. It's from someone that uses our system as a consultant. It says, what is the latest on smartphone apps that interface with you, with your system? Companies I work with in my consulting are starting to ask about this. So I thought since it's something internally that we've been working around, that might as well as share what we're kind of considering in the next year.
Yeah, so the short answer is our goal is to have something up by Q2. So we're working on dealing with the different, the different choices. Our choices, our internal strategic planning, and our choices around which platform to go with and how to serve our entire customer base, whereas, of course, we're not all operating off the same smartphone operating systems, and so from a small business perspective, those choices are pretty significant. So you can expect from us to meet that need. We agree with you. We are also being asked about that, and so you can expect to see something come out in Q2 that serves that need of having, as one of the trends we recently said, is always with you, always on, always connected. So we also want to be your priorities in your pocket, on your phone, for your staff. So our plan is to meet that need.
So one of the product management, it's a tentative Q2, that's Q3, but no, it's good. I thought it was a good question. We've been hearing about it. Unless we don't have any other questions that have been typed in, if anybody has one, they can type it in real quick or raise their hand. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. I know it's a little bit early, but we definitely welcome the questions. So in the next strategy huddle or any live ones that you have in future, I'm just getting one in. Hold on just a second. Nancy, you want to go ahead and read that one?
Yeah, we had a question that came in here about just, isn't it just most important just to focus on the top line? With a good top line, nothing else really would matter. So why do we really need a strategic plan? Just give me the top line. It's all about the top line.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that actually focusing on the top line is very important, and the top line is the most important for businesses. But also without a strategic plan, which you're really not focusing on too, which is going to drive that top line, is the employee performance, their motivation, getting employees engaged and trained, and also product development, the services that you're offering, and developing the leaders, and also the operations. You're not focusing on the other perspectives if you're just focusing on the top line. So a strategic plan does incorporate all of that. And you need all of the different perspectives in order to accomplish, to really hold true to your mission, to accomplish the vision, and to walk out the values. So a strategic plan is really your main tool to accomplish that.
And of course, we know from our, we all believe in the balanced approach that it all starts with the people driving the operations, driving our value-creating activities to our market, that of course, as an outcome, generates top-line performance, and of course, most importantly, bottom line profitability. So